Look left, look right. Yes, you're in a place. Ever wondered what goes into making great places? Join Jeff and Matt as they speak to placemakers across the globe and have a chat about what goes into creating the workplaces, communities, hotels, restaurants, civic spaces, even cities that we all use on the daily.
Okay, welcome to the Places for People podcast. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is recorded, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Pay respects to their leaders, past, present, and emerging. So, hi, I'm Jeff.
And I'm Matthew.
And we're going to be speaking to strategists, creatives, place and property professionals to find out what goes into planning, creating and running some of the coolest places on the planet. Today we have with us Stuart O'Brien. Stu is CEO and founder of Houston Group, a strategic brand and design agency working with some of Australia's most iconic brands. Houston works with organisations such as Qantas, UTS and Lendlease to help define what brand means to them. They also have helped define place brands and identities that have transformed some of the most high-profile developments in Australia and across the world. Each episode, we start by asking our guests to paint a picture of their favourite places, either near or far. What place holds a dear place in your heart?
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, everyone. Look, places are one of the things I love. And, you know, when you talk about place to me, one gets very personal, you know, about home and comfort and family and safety, you know, and my own time, you know, and I kind of joked about that when I was thinking about this question. My spa, outdoor spa, screen to watch the footy, you know, I can sit in it. It's this beautiful north-facing light. I can see the kind of massive sky above, and it's just my place, you know, and it's a place where I can, you know, just feel quite centered. Footy, screen, beer, water, you know, all the elements. So, and day and night and winter and cold. And then, you know, for me, other places just really draw me, you know. So I think that's the thing, like we're talking about the South Coast of New South Wales, you know, I'm never born there, but have just felt a draw to it, you know, some of those places with light and calmness, you know, and then flipping that, you know, when I think about places that I feel something is getting on that plane. You know, I must say, I was lucky enough to work for Qantas for over 20 years. And when Mark, that first class lounge that Mark designed, you know, almost 15 years ago, you go up that stair and you just feel like I'm going somewhere, you know, and there's just a recharge that happens. And, you know, and then I think about all the great restaurants and bars and cafes and streets that you walk down. They're always places that take you somewhere. And I know that's both in the literal sense, but wonderful places have this tendency to draw you. They have a capacity to put you in that mood, you know, and that frame of thinking that you're looking for, you know, and so, you know, it's something I take really seriously. You know, it's something I actually sometimes think in the modern world we've forgotten about the fine-grained DNA that goes into actually making it great. And there's some great, you know, we're lucky enough in Australia to have some of those special places, you know, that I think are both natural, you know, then enhanced by us, but then equally some of the most incredible, iconic, you know, places probably in the world. You know, pretty lucky to grow up here.
It's an interesting kind of, you know, difference between the natural kind of places and those man-made places. Do you have a preference?
I think as I age, I do, if that makes sense. You know, you've known me for a long time. I'm a pretty vibrant out there, go guy. And it's only probably my mum that says at some point in time, I'm going to throw a switch and just stop and do nothing. You know, I've lots of businesses, lots of investments, you know, really successful company, but I can see that time coming of going and just sitting on that rock, you know, at Jiroa, you know, and where you can then reflect and you've earned that time to soak up nature. So I do, because I do think it's around you, and I do think it influences us. So young, you know, silly, crazy, on a pathway to prove myself, urban, global, you know, vibe, density, you know, big lights, day, night, it drove me, you know, increasingly though, you know, that contrast is pretty amazing.
Well, I mean, it's amazing. I'm just taking a bit back by the spa to the first class lounge. It's just such a vast difference of place I've too been lucky enough to be in the first class lounge as well. I actually think Qantas has made that their brand. So people know Qantas as their first class lounge, whether you're in Sydney, London, LA. Talk to me a bit about how they brought the brand into that, and people know Qantas first class lounge.
Brand and place. It was really interesting if I think about Qantas. It was one of the, as a 25-year-old, I really started to see the cross-section of brand into place, and this isn't a shot at architects or interior designers, but the university courses is, often architecture is taught about materiality, about customer centricity, about flow, about, moving people through spaces, and often macro forms. And actually probably wasn't the first class lounge, but the first time we launched CityFly in Australia, almost probably 20 years ago now. And weirdly, Qantas came to us first before the architect. And it was, how do you create when we launched CityFly, we launched CityFly without a budget, like without advertising, without positioning. We activated a terminal space. We identified lounges and we identified check-ins, and we ingrained a sense of offer within an environment. And back then I remember copying a heap, I think, from one of the architects working on it, saying, you've just plastered the walls in graphics and you've plastered the walls in, and it was done beautifully. It was done, on a pencil, a gold pencil, but it's a beautiful aesthetic, but it started with the message and it started with the story, not with the place, if that makes sense in that instance. It started with the brand. Yeah. And so I think since then I've been really respectful of often the commercial spaces that we build have a function and form. In that lounge, ironically, I don't want to see a lot of Qantas. That what you would expect, the reds and the consumer Qantas. That is the pointy end of the brand. That is the experience that should feel most reflective of the audiences that sit in there. And actually, by getting that right, you get it right. And it's the symbols in there that Mark was so talented on. I think the kick back to that first time as you come up that escalator and you get the arrivals and departures, kind of board that flicks over, and the materiality, and then it's Qantas. There's some slight touches of red in the lounges that you'll see and in the leathers. And so in that instance, it is the brand by being the best the brand is for that audience in that instance. It's very then calculating about experience and brand from first to business to economy. And then equally on some of the services that you feel, whether you're a platinum, silver, gold or bronze, that how did we in the days line up those experiences to make it feel complete, but also I'm having a type of journey through from the fixed or from my phone or from my card in my wallet through to the seat in the plane.
It's interesting you say about those symbolic gestures. Something that fascinates me. How important do you think symbolism is in terms of creating place?
It's at the heart. Like one of the things we talk about in cultural transformation is symbolisms and identity. And airlines then into place if we use both. I was lucky enough to create Jetstar and worked on the creation of Jetstar. And if you close your eyes for everything that you know about Jetstar now, when we created Jetstar, it was actually positioned more premium than Qantas in essence. The plane's silver, so it's heavier to get off the ground, right? So you'd never do a low-cost carrier with a silver plane. The spec was, Verve was the kind of color that we wanted, and then silver, and we had a Mercedes kind of silver color. The seats were leather, right? If you spec'd it, metallic paint, leather seats, white, it's like the spec wasn't a specification of a low-cost carrier. And what we did was and this is where I think what you're talking about symbolism is the symbolic presentation of that product to market. And then we let price determine where it sits, not product experience. And I think place, I think Westfield, if you think about the money Westfield, what Westfield did and what the essence of Westfield was when you entered that place, whether I was in Mount Druitt, whether I was in Parramatta, whether I was in Bondi Junction, they had an amazing capacity to make people feel symbolically they are in an experience, even though it was a mall, right? So symbolism and materiality and highlights and detail are really critical,
So you've done that through visual elements. So the leather creates the higher, performance base in your brain. How did you then position Jetstar as a medium star size carrier?
Where it was started, it was a low cost carrier. It was
Low-cost carrier.
Yeah, it was what, probably the second or third in the world, launched after Ryanair. And it was disrupting because we saw you've seen things like Zara come in where all of us in the West or all of us with lots of money want good things. Mass manufacturing and manufacturing of aircraft allow us to now have that. So to that point, if you go right back to the launch of Jetstar, it was I worked with an incredible ad guy called Ted Horton at the launch. And, we used Magna. She was fun. She had energy. She had a boldness to her. It was the fun part. And so that was the permission part to engage in that low cost carrier. So it gave you permission. What we never wanted anyone to do was feel they left with a cheap product. I didn't, and we went through all the namings, and Alan was my client back then, and we didn't want Fair Go Airlines. We didn't want Bonzo. We didn't I think one's just launched in Australia with a name like that. And people don't want to be reminded once you make that. And look at IKEA. Like, think about your space. Like no one walks in or out of IKEA feeling they've taken a cheap option. They feel they've got a functional, beautifully designed, beautifully considered something for their home.
Yeah,
right?
A designer piece.
A designer piece. And that's, I think everything we're talking about is that ability of designing something up front, that ability to consider something, that it is worth it. And what sets us apart now often in brands, or when you've got mass creation of anything, buildings, cars, it comes down to a design aesthetic. It comes down to a feeling. It comes down to the hardware and software, that we wrap around that person to make them feel something.
Well, we've had some good chats about some really good brands. So some brands that people know they trust, they understand that they're going to get good value, they're going to get good design. What are some of the biggest mistakes people make when creating either that place or that identity towards a place?
Common story and common language, and being very clear of the role of each of the contact points. Sometimes mistakes get made, and let's use the airline or a building. Sometimes people will chase a segment, and the segment doesn't want to be chased. And you even think about Kmart, I think, and I suppose I'm only talking about the good things because it's very hard to identify the bad things, if that makes sense. You don't know where something went wrong. I see a lot of disconnect sometimes, I think, in buildings that, and look, we're new at this, guys. There's only been the last decade that the unlocking of large-scale transformation, where you've seen a step change with unlocking of government land or reurbanization or revitalization of large pockets of land. Up until that, we're pretty restricted to, I bought someone's house, I bought their next door house, I bought the next door house, and I now might be able to put something bigger up here, right? So, of course, we're very building centric, right? So to answer that point, sometimes people were very restricted. They didn't know what they had to give up except for the MLC tower, which I think is a wonderful Lendlease example, where they understood there needed to probably be if we gave a little bit of space back at the ground level, the height above is probably going to be great and it's going to have a better ground plane and a better experience. So there's different roles, if that makes sense. So I think when people don't do the thinking around whatever they're designing, from a kitchen to a car park to an outdoor, what's the role of that in the experience and how you want to make people feel?
Absolutely. So just coming back to that is obviously the consideration up front. And I know that Houston have worked on a lot of big, urbanization type projects. And I guess arguably people would say potentially like an architect or a designer might be the first port of call, for a precinct or a development of that scale. Is that correct? Or why do you think, someone like Houston Group coming in is better at that early point in time?
Yeah, look, I don't think it's better. I think it's complementary. The land economics, so if you start with a development manager, that people need to understand the planning restrictions, the planning controls, the opportunity, the land economics. At the end of the day, if we don't live in fairyland. Like, we can't come along and build what we want and put in what we want and spend what we want and expect a return, right? It doesn't exist. Equally, I have such deep respects for architects, designers, like to conceive something that's eventually going to be built, to be able to draw that on a piece of paper, to have a scale of something of that scale that works, still blows me away. And every architect I speak to wouldn't even remotely think about getting their pen out if they didn't have an engineer next to them, right? So if you can't build it, we can't create it, right? And if you can't afford to build it, then you can't think about creating it or building it, right? So it's not an either or. It really isn't. But I think marketing, so let's use the term marketing or customer or strategy, I think we have a part to play in a common story about a place, or helping unlock perhaps how that fine grain stitches back into a city, or what in a competitive nature as well, because I think we sometimes forget when we walk into these buildings, those three genres, we're in competition often.
Absolutely.
And if you leave it to the end to pick up the phone to me, you have left it too late, right? And the core principle of marketing, in 1965, when we moved out of industrial revolution to consumer-centric revolution, is the 4 Ps. And everyone forgets P1 is product. If you get the product right, it's then diminishing returns through those. And too often developers and builders and my clients think that marketing is the last P, promotion.
Yep.
And that's when the mistakes get made. So it's not either or better. It's a complementary role. And Toyota is our biggest client globally. So I'm working with Toyota Motor Company with their brand, but we don't even call it brand anymore, up in Tidum in Thailand to build cars that you guys won't see for 8 years. But they've understood to become a mobility company and transform that our story is now writing the brief so that the engineers and the designers have a common language, have a common understanding of place, in this instance a car or a mobility experience, and now everyone's focused on the same story.
Yeah.
Right? So it's complementary, mate. It's not either or. But when you don't have it, and I can name 2 or 3 projects we both know where perhaps the architect was wrong, because often an architect has a very defined style or a very defined genre, or equally can't stretch to do the type of statement a site may want, or actually ironically making too much of a statement a site they want.
Yeah. So would you say it's about as well, you bring, I guess, being the voice of the potential customers, the potential consumers of that place or product, whereas, someone else may not start from that point of view as to who the end user is?
I think there's truth in success as many fathers, right? If you miss one of those dads on the way through, bands, like you don't have a good drummer.
Yep.
And you go, oh, gosh, we don't have a good drummer. Ouch. Right. Our bass player's crap. Like, I think it's acknowledging as we've expanded our intellect of design, architecture, place, as humans get more simple but more complicated, if that makes sense. And I really think we're getting simpler and more complicated. That having that voice, and when I talk about voice, common language for a project, often each of those genres that we speak about actually all talk in different languages, right? They all walk into a room thinking everyone in the room is going to understand them. And what good strategy does or good language does is in a brand, so if this is where I cross over from my brand work to my place work, is a consistent language and story. And people wrap that into a vision or a CVP, or it's like, guys, it's just about us all knowing the path we're all on, whoever you are. And that's what our job is, storytellers. Like our expertise is to write great stories. And great stories have a great beginning, they have a great middle, they have a great end. People can read it and know what they have to do with it. We're the storytellers in the middle of it. We're the guys that make it feel more believable than it is, or gets more commitment for a capital or a better site or better partners.
Yeah, I love the term storyteller. I mean, we obviously bring you back to what's core to our business is obviously interiors, commercial, building, design, architecture. So we're looking at how we can create places for people within their work environment. And what we've found over the last 10 to 15 years has changed dramatically. But if you fast forward over the last 24 months, obviously without, using the big C word, life has changed dramatically. People aren't using their workspace as a workspace. They're using it as a place to come to collaborate, to meet with people, to actually be a part of a business. How do you translate that to what you're seeing in the market from a place?
I love working from home. I think I understand it, why people travel and things. But what I'm seeing is it worked when we all knew each other in teams, right? And I'm seeing in big organizations, so big clients which will remain nameless, it was fine for 2 years because we didn't have changeover in leadership, or I didn't have changeover in middle management, or when it's suddenly starting to come around to review time, and it's suddenly starting to come around to promotion time, and it's suddenly starting to come around to advancement of the business, people are actually starting to look left and right and go, oh, hang on. Are they up for have they got the ticker? Have they been in a room? Can they pull it off? Like all the humanity part of work, which we all thrive on, because is the soft stuff's gone. So even when you're talking, then you're still talking about it in a job sense.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, so, and I think the problem which we're now facing, I can see it, is we're still talking in the job, right, versus the people in the job and what the people need. And equally the people in the company, what they need and what the company needs of their people. You know, we struggle. You know, I think we've got people, we're back to Thursday and Friday. We had a job go off the rails last night that would have been fixed if we're in the same room, that would have had a sensitivity or a tactility to it that we would have picked. Instead, when you're not together, you don't know what's happening. And if you leave it to digital and you leave it to the e-commerce, the electronic part of what we do, you don't know if they're having dinner with their kids. You don't want to intrude. You don't know if they're having a problem. Like, so there's this sense of doubt that comes into a human relationship when you're not in the same room. So yeah, it's really, I think we're in a really tricky place.
The next piece is obviously culture.
Yeah.
So we really, really drive a strong culture within our organization. So I do a lot of traveling between our offices, you know, across the country through 2 years of Teams or Zoom or whatever you're using for a platform. The culture's changed. I wouldn't say it's better or worse, but it's changed. People are having virtual drinks versus going down to have a drink with a friend or going for a walk. How do you feel culture can be rebuilt within a place versus a workplace?
Yeah, as with everything, technology can enhance or detract.
Yeah.
Right. And I feel we haven't yet worked out how to enhance. The little drinks and stuff are cool. Like when my guys did it, we did cooking and we did this and we did that, and it was kind of fun. But gosh, you only had to walk out in Sydney last weekend and walk back to a game of footy or back on a street, and like I can't wait to get out and sit. Like the you know, you don't have to go to the city surf or feel the energy of people on the street again. So to your point, I don't think we should be trying to replace it. How does technology enhance that? How do we make it easier? How do we set up some? And we've got some guidelines of how you use it, because I can see it being quite restrictive. How that influences what you guys build and how you put things together. The irony is I still don't think the old world and the new world knows how to work together. So often I do see when people go back into the office, they're all running off to small rooms, put on their earphones to get a quiet zone to talk to the 1,000 people that are still
At home.
Right? So we haven't yet monitored we used to do it through Monday to Friday. 9 till 6. So we actually had a common language, back to what I talk about, Brent, a common understanding of when we do that and then we don't do that. Now it's like, am I at home? Do I have my kids? Like, we haven't worked it out. And designers like yourselves, I think, are going to have to build more hybrid spaces. No more set and forget. And I think this comes right back to the heart of development, where even if you think about Westfield and retailers and commercial spaces, how do we not make things so fixed? How do we make things feel more flexible? How do we not expect it to be designed and finished today?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? That's the biggest step change I think we're going to see.
Long-term partnership in change and iteration over time, I think it's such a good insight. It's such a big thing, is that no longer are you doing a workplace design or building a place or what have you, and then it just sits there forever. But there is a big role to play in partnership and change management over a long period of time.
I agree. I know this sounds odd, but I could see a time when I buy a company like yours and we sign on a 3-year contract. It's not a 3-year build contract. It's a baseline fit out. My people are going to use the space. We're going to observe how they use the space. We're going to think about what we need as a business or the change in the marketplace, a little bit like the WeWork space that we're in now. And we're going to adapt it. Now, this is fixed. It's fixed, and they depend on the consumer or me to come in and out and pick what I need here. But the commercial space is fixed, and we move into it. In the future, I can see where the commercial spaces are going to need to be adaptable based on what their people need and based on what's going on, right? And how do you do that? How do you make that function? How do you make that economic? How do you put a value to that, right?
I mean, that's a very big question mark at the moment. A lot of, your B grade, your fringe landlords are looking to reposition assets.
Yep.
But they're not just doing it individually. They're actually getting together with their neighbor.
Yep.
So back to the whole, you buy one house, you buy two or three. Now it's partnerships. You're getting 2 and 3 buildings in Surrey Hills, in Darlinghurst that are repositioning assets holistically. Yep. So they're creating a place for people to come, shopping, entertainment. What do you see the next step or the next iteration of that is?
I think you only have to look to the past, look to the future. Again, development became a dirty word here somewhere. And it still is the problem with our industry. When did development, such a positive word, become such a negative or a fear for our community? We have a brand issue for the whole category. That's one, a lack of trust and a lack of history that we have to fix, to have permission to actually build the type of spaces that the architects you talked about and the economists, I've never met someone that wants to do something bad, right? Yep. So we've got a problem there. We've got a gap in the marketplace there, right? And a lack of understanding. Density is good, right? We have not explained to everybody the most incredible places and spaces in the world are dense, are people, work. Density is good. We haven't got yet in Sydney or Australia that density is good. We haven't run that mandate. So what do I see in the future, and that what you're talking about is people want to live, work, play. They want it easy. Look at the hubs of Europe, right? Look at the great cities of the world. We pushed everybody out and gave them no jobs, gave them a Pizza Hut and a Chinese restaurant, gave them little access to education or facilities, and then expected them to get on with their life and travel 2 and 3 hours a day. It doesn't work. So a lot of I think the reurbanizing of the cities and making them rich, but with good planning and good transport, hats off to the metro, hats off to the state government. I'm apolitical, but I think the scale of the metro is something this country and city needed so long ago, and hats off to them for being so bold with it, because it's those connection points that allows what you're talking about to really happen. And it allows for people to feed off that infrastructure to create the type of places people want. But you need people.
Absolutely. If there's no people, there is no place. It's as simple as that, right?
Correct.
And you see that in places that don't have that diverse mix of types of place. So residential and commercial and food and beverage and all of those things, that if they're not together, they're not co-located, they're not easily accessible, that you have a place that may be vibrant throughout the day, but then at nighttime everyone's gone, or vice versa when that doesn't work. So, it's hugely important to get to that point.
And there's a sustainable economic model in that too, which we need to think about, right? Because those healthy little retailers, or the people, are medium businesses then, right? They're people that might want to come in and have a go and not work for someone and start something, believe in something. So when you've then got someone behind the counter that's their business and they love it, suddenly the whole place becomes more personal. Suddenly they're not there clicking in, clicking out and going away. They're there to make a business, to build connections, to build customers. You've even got to come one step deeper about that and the type of people that attracts and the role each individual person. It's not like just another big Coles or another big Woolies or another, it's that sucks those kind of baker, butcher, candlestick maker out and pulls them into, one big listed entity, versus having a local butcher, and around density allows a little bakery to thrive and not feel like they have to compete with the car park at Westfield, right?
Obviously, Houston, yourself have worked on a lot of different urbanisation type projects. And what would you say you've seen as the most successful, I guess, in those early stages?
Yeah, look, I think Barangaroo, we learnt a lot. We're sitting in it now. I smiled like I created One Shelley Street. I did Streets of Barangaroo. I'm pretty proud of stretching the city out. And I think Lendlease and we all did an amazing job of showing a city can stretch and building a fine grain and making a place. And again, on the back of, the government committing to We Need Walk and connections, right? Not making things hard. I love Darling Square. I think Darling Square was the first time we didn't go to market with asset classes. And what I mean by that, having to do ITS Tower, needing an asset for the commercial, and Adara needing a resi product. What I'm most proud of with Darling Square was it just feels like it was always there. Trying to reconnect that, Rob Deck back then said, forget the red line. How do we actually talk back to the city versus putting that kind of red line up? So I think all those projects, Melbourne Quarter, I think when we stopped trying to be Docklands and we said, actually, guys, like it's Melbourne, and that's the bit of the strategy in naming and some of the magic, People don't think it's Melbourne. What do we call it? Let's call it Melbourne Quarter. People are not going to think there's going to be any streets at Barangaroo, or any fine grain streets of Barangaroo.
Yeah. Back to that symbolism, I guess.
Symbolism, identity, that's the comms job. That's the storytelling job. That's the tell the story people are not thinking the place is going to be. Confront the fears, reassure, but then make sure you deliver on that. That's where I'm saying we're a complementary part. I can't write a story that doesn't come to life.
When you kind of get to that early stage, practically, how does Houston do it? I know we talk a lot about, getting in a room and sitting next to an architect, but, what do you guys actually do? How does that work?
It's a bit of art and science. It's a creative process, but I always say good strategy is founded. So that was what I'm saying. When you think about it, it is using the data. It is using the land economics. It is using all the things. We look to competitive analysis around what's in the market. We think about what the need is, right? And so we kind of split it out into twofold, with our place print. One of the disciplines we bring is the story about what we create and define versus what we sell and tell. As something marketers, developers, we need to think what we build or how we build something isn't necessarily how we're going to position it and tell it. Actually, the best example at the moment is Western Sydney International Airport. So we're in on doing the whole Western Sydney International Airport place strategy and destination and really build. It's an amazing project to be involved in. How do we do that? We look at the future, we look at the community we want to create. It's a marketing thing, consumer at the centric, and then we apply our normal strategy kind of disciplines, and then we're creative over the top, right? So trying to find that distinction, trying to take the knowledge that you have and then write something that feels distinct, write something that feels pure, write something that feels true. So make no mistake, it's a science plus art, as I'm sure with architects, with everybody, So you can't put your foot on it, but when you get it right, the story comes to life in front of you, and then you build into that, if that makes sense.
I mean, the pressure must be intense. You're talking about a couple, pretty much the biggest developments in Sydney over the last sort of 15 years, Western Sydney Airport, Barangaroo. How do you take that pressure and then, I suppose, turn that into fuel?
Oh, I love my job. It's my thing, which is why I keep it at 28 people max. I carry the black pen, which my clients stay with me forever because I love it, and it's actually the challenge, which is why it's called Houston. We have a problem. It's kind of sits at the heart of what we do. So I'm also doing a lot of work with Toga, on Tech Central and, being involved in a few of those projects. So for me, it is a pressure, but pressure gets the better results. It scrutinizes the process. And, back to our category, marketing and design, I sometimes think we haven't trained our strategists to go deep enough yet. Even with my guys now, I'll know more about a site often than the development manager. I've just had the instance where I've kind of pulled out all these artifacts that I found in a rare bookshop, which I'll take back to the city like I did at Darling Square against the city to prove that what those street names were long before even maps, right, or gazetted stuff. So you got to have substance to your story, but you've got to have the curiosity to want to do it. So I love the pressure, and people that work in my team are great and love it too. It's self. If you don't love it, don't do it.
I think we're kind of getting to the end of things, and we like to have just some final quick fire questions. If you can prepare yourself to give us your best possible answers.
The spa.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the plane still.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It could be. Stu, what's your opinion on the number one consideration for successful placemaking of the future?
Sensitivity. Really thinking how you want that place to work. And the role. And the role might be a simple functional one. Then don't make it something else. Just know what you want from it and expect of it.
What's the coolest thing that you've seen in placemaking in your kind of days of working across the world?
I mean, what makes something cool as well? It'd be good to know what makes something
Yeah, it's interesting
cool
you say it. When you say it, I go to a place, I remember I watched Coal Drops Yard, and I think Heather Wick, an amazing studio. And the Pancras Station, the juxtaposition between Cold Drops Yard and just walking back into something that was just so beautifully restored with the standard across. I stay in the standard and have breakfast in the Pancras, right? Like for me, I love it. Right, I'm in London. I can jump on a train and be anywhere. A plane, stay in the standard and have breakfast in the Pancras. Like that's my thing,
cool.
right?
That's pretty cool, right?
That's my. Ask me what I want to do. That's my weekend, right there. That's
yeah.
I mean, how do everyday people, I suppose, get involved in creating places for people as well? Like, what are some helpful hints that you can leave us with?
Yeah, and I've just bought a house at Giro, and it's really interesting. I've gone to some architects and designers, so I went to Mark. Who am I going to trust to build my place? Right, I know most of the architects, and it's very different how the people have responded to my brief and responded to me. And one architect firm that I've, in particular, really started with the narrative and the story and wanting to know our story. And I think that ability for anyone to really define what you want in your place. And I think it's hard because it's different language for people. So for your clients your clients especially, they're like, what do you mean? I just want people to turn up to work. It's like, no, does this have to represent your brand? So when people like in an ad agency, is it a segment defining experience? Are you neutral? Are you friendly? Is there a formality to this? Are you trying to, do people think you're a lawyer, but you want them to feel like you're a muso? Are you a muso, but you want to feel like a lawyer? Is there different moods that you need to do where you actually want to be serious every now and then, even with your staff? Or is it all paper planes and, kind of madness? So sit and take time. Think about how you want it to work, but then equally don't be so fixed on an outcome, I think, and however you can build some flexibility, I think, in the future, which I think is tough for you guys, right? It is hard. It's going to be really hard.
Go back to telling that story. So if we can go on the journey, understand what the client's needs and wants are, tell that story all the way through.
Yep.
We're getting a place for people, right? We're creating something.
Like we jump to materiality very quickly. We jump to furnishing and it's like, yeah. You know what I mean? Like we're set up to get the job ready for the builder. And well, how much is it going to cost? Because that's really important, right? So somehow we need to find a way of an A package, B package, C package to go, look, these are the zones and, how do we save money here versus there? And I do see in commercial especially too much kind of $5,000 a square meter from the left side of the building to the right side of the building, right? It's like, well, hang on, how did that just happen? It's because we get on the machine quickly, we get on the production machine quickly, which we need. So start with a story, try and engage with people, and I'm the brand and marketing guy. So I'm saying, like, when you ask me that question, I think, what's the role of your place in the presentation of your business? And I say it all the time. You spend money on staff, you spend money, like Toyota dealerships, right? And I always laugh at the guys. So you spend more money on acreage than you do on advertising. You spend more money on staff than you do on advertising. Why are we talking about advertising? Right? Like, it's important.
Mate, that was absolutely awesome. Some fascinating points of view. And obviously you've been to so many places across the world, worked on creating so many places. And it's been an absolute pleasure to get those insights from you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me. It's cool.
Thank you very much, Stu.
Thanks,
Have a
guys.
good day.
Thank you.
The Places for People podcast is made for you by Creo and NPM. We believe if your people matter, your place does too. Check out how we can help with your place design and building needs at placesforpeople.com.au. Whether it's a brand new workplace for your team, a bar, restaurant, a retail renovation, or a million things in between, we've got you covered.